Hey everyone, great to see you all here again, and welcome to today's community session, Navigating the Proxy Paradox. So, I'm Lakshya from the Zite community team, and tonight we have got a really insightful session lined up with Ian Kerins. So, he's a founder of ScrapeOps, and he's in the trenches of web scraping for a lot of years. And today he is going to break down the hidden factors that quietly inflate the proxy usage, bust few common myths around performance and pricing, and he will also share super practical framework for choosing the right proxy setup. So just get comfy, get your questions ready. We'll pick it at the end. And Ian, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Great to get to talk to you today. My name is Ian Kerins, and what we're going to be talking about today is like navigating what we're calling the proxy paradox, and then the end result is to choose the best proxy solution in the age of like falling proxy prices but increasing scraping costs. So first, like, who am I? So over the last 8 years, I've been in the web scraping industry, working in different proxy companies and scraping companies. Started off with Zite when it was originally Scraping Hub, and then moved into Scraper API, and now I'm the CEO and co-founder of ScrapeOps, which is a proxy aggregator where we aggregate all the different proxy solutions together into one API endpoint, and we find the best proxy for your particular use case. Jump straight into it. So, what is the proxy paradox? And that is something that we have observed, and I've observed over the last couple of years being in the industry. And what that really means is typically when technologies mature, and the price falls. So, you think solar panels, the price of gigawatt generated from a solar panel drops over time. Same with cloud compute and storage, etc. And that has been happening with proxies. So the proxy prices have been falling. Um, in the last 5 years alone, the cost of residential proxies has dropped about 75%. Um, but there's a paradox happening in the proxy market itself, is in that although proxy prices are dropping, costs for scraping are increasing dramatically, and they're actually increasing a lot faster than proxy prices are dropping, meaning that our proxy prices, our scraping costs now are typically more expensive and higher than what they were 5 years ago, and we can see that in ScrapeOps data as well. Um, if we look at our data over the last 5 years and going back, and you see that before it was maybe like 2 to 5% of all requests through our platform and typical like scraping API platforms um, would require residential proxies or JavaScript rendering. So basically, meaning more than one credit to scrape a page. Now that has increased to nearly 25%. So we are processing billions of pages per month, but 25% of them now require some form of extra capabilities, be it residential, JavaScript rendering, or some anti-bot bypass to actually get successful responses. Um, that is driving up the cost of scraping dramatically because these 25% are now premium requests. They might cost 10 times more than what a normal request might cost. So 5 years ago, so most websites were scrapable with data center proxies. You rarely needed a residential. Uh, Anti-bot usage was primarily just on sneaker websites and a few large websites. And in the odd case, you might need JavaScript rendering to render a page. It was odd. It wasn't. Sometimes you needed, but most of the time you didn't. Today, most large websites are using some form of anti-bot, requiring us to use advanced fingerprints or residential proxies to bypass. And dynamic content is making JavaScript rendering just like much more common. And like one easy example of this is like, okay, 5 years ago, 9 of the top 10 e-commerce websites were scrapable with data center proxies. Today, it's only 4 of them. So those other 5 of them that have switched from they're now more expensive. You're using residentials or you're using JavaScript rendering, and that has dramatically increased the cost and complexity of scraping those websites at scale. And it's the same thing for social media. Before, 4 of the top 5 were scrapable with data center proxies. Now it's only 1 of them, um, dramatically increasing the costs if you're scraping these websites at scale. And there's also outside of the actual like dealing with antibots, there's also these shadow costs emerging as we're scraping that are driving up our scraping costs. Um, One of them obviously is just like more websites are requiring the page to be rendered to access data. And that mightn't be because of antibots, but it's they're moving to more dynamically generated content on pages. And once you switch from normal HTTP requests to headless browser, you're increasing your cost 5 to 10x just because you're the increased usage of the proxies, the bandwidth is going through it, but also the server and compute increasing costs. Um, the same things that happen is like websites are reducing the number of responses per request. One of the clear examples of that is the largest search engine website in the world. I can't say the name, but everyone knows what it is. Recently have limited the responses to 10 results, whereas before it could be 100. And now to actually scrape the same amount of data is 10xing your costs. Um, Also, websites are moving data to pop-ups to either require you to use a headless browser to fully render the page to get the data from this module that pops up on the side of the screen, or you have to scrape the underlying API endpoints. Headless browsers obviously increase the costs, but if you're using even scraping API endpoints, typically it's more difficult to scrape them at scale because it's easier for the antibots to detect you and block you because you're now dealing with cookies and session harvesting and stuff like that. There's a lot more complexity involved in it. So as we see it inside in ScrapeOps when we're doing this at scale, when we see people scraping API endpoints, typically it's just harder to optimize these things and they're more prone to issues. And another cost that we see shadow cost we see is like false positives from proxy providers, but also the underlying websites. And that is websites returning 200 response codes, but the actual data isn't fully present on the page. And inside in ScrapeOps, we budget around like 5% of our responses are actually returning false positives. And that's like a silent cost on your proxy expenses because it's you're paying for these false positives. And if it goes really bad for some proxy providers, they're not as good at managing this or the websites themselves. You can add 50 to 100% onto your proxy costs very quickly if the underlying proxy provider is not filtering out these false positives. So now, like next, just moving into some of the myths we've observed inside the proxy market itself, and that's just lessons we've learned from like scraping billions of pages per month through our own platform. So number one, there is a best proxy provider. You see this a lot in all the proxy providers. They say they're the best in their marketing, etc. But the reality is there is no universal best proxy provider. It's all down to your use case and the particular domain you're scraping. And sometimes it's down to the particular page type you're scraping on domain, or is it a page or API endpoint? That underlying performance can vary massively between proxy providers for different websites, but also different page types on particular websites. And like the way we look at it as well is like if there was a best proxy provider out there, there would be no need for ScrapeOps. There would be no need for a middleman to be in the center to figure out who's actually the best proxy provider for your use case. So that's something we've observed. The second one is you can trust Google and proxy reviews to actually tell you what is the best proxy provider. And the reality of this is the best proxy providers aren't on page one of Google. And they often don't appear in the top proxy provider lists. You see a lot of these lists out there on different websites, but in the vast majority of cases, you put your own proxy up number one, and then you sell off the other slots to the best to whoever's going to pay you the most. Vast majority of the time, the actual lists have no correlation to the best possible proxy provider for your use case, and the same goes for Google. I can tell you for a fact in Science ScrapeOps, all our large volume proxy providers are not on the page one of Google. Who were putting like 70, 80% of our volume through, they're down page 2, 3, 4 of Google if you search best residential proxies or best data center proxies. Um, so yeah, it's just this myth that you can't really trust Google or proxy reviews. The second or the third myth in proxies is you pay for what you get. And this is something we normally associate in life of it's a bit more expensive, it is better quality, etc. But in reality, in proxies, the price you pay has very little correlation to the performance you get. Um, so this current graph here was for one of the most popular e-commerce websites out there that we basically benchmarked 10 different proxy providers, their performance versus their cost. What we saw is that like there's very little correlation between the price you pay and the performance you get. And the actual mathematically, it works out 0.15, like the correlation coefficient. One would be a direct correlation between price and performance. Zero is no correlation. Um, so it's basically saying that there's very weak correlation going on. And in this case, the second cheapest proxy provider was actually given the best performance. And you had people who are charging 10 to 50 times more in price, but the performance was worse, or the performance was the exact same. And this is what we see across the board inside in our company. And see it in the case of all our end users as well. And the last myth I was going to say is that better proxies is the answer. And that's something that we've come conditioned to believe. That is like, okay, if we're having an issue with a particular website, we just need to switch to our proxy providers. But that used to be very much true, but now it's most bans are actually coming from fingerprint links, not the proxy quality. So optimizing your request headers, aligning your browser fingerprints with the headers you're sending, implementing cookie harvesting is normally a much better solution than changing proxy provider. And that is how your typical the experts in the market, like so the different scraping APIs, what they're doing is they are using data center proxies, but they're using very well optimized headers and fingerprints that are basically convincing the websites that they are legitimate requests. They're using much cheaper proxies than your average end user. Um, from our own data, we can see that 90% of domains can still be scraped with data center proxies and optimized fingerprints. You don't need residential proxies. You don't need to have JavaScript rendering to scrape most websites. And still, through our own platform, about 75 to 80% of all our volume is going through data center proxies in the end proxy providers. Um, so is this a myth that we've kind of been sold in the proxy world? Is like you need to use residentials to scrape all the big websites, and that's not the case. You're just paying more money for the same, and some cases, worse performance. So that's a lot of the background, but like this is what like the next movement is like that more actionable steps is like how to choose the best proxy provider for your use case in this new age of the market, um, where basically our scraping costs are increasing exponentially. Underlying to this, there is a trade-off equation in when how you pick the proxy provider for your use case, and it comes down really to what is your priority. And there's three factors in this: price, performance, and the amount of hassle you're willing to go to set up your proxy solution and also to maintain it. And we can only really, if we optimize for say price and performance, um, most of the time, basically, we have to sacrifice hassle. We have to do a lot of this work in house to really squeeze the most out of our proxy budget, do get the best performance at the lowest cost. We have to do it in house, so we have very high hassle. If we want very good performance at zero hassle, we're gonna have to pay higher prices. So a lot of this comes down to what is your priority as in your particular use case, and that's come down to the economics of your scraping stack and like your end use case. Um, what is the highest priority for you? And a lot of the time we say to people is, okay, find something that's in the middle ground. That's normally the best, a combination of relatively low hassle, good enough price, uh, and it gives you good performance. So typically, as you're picking like the best proxy setup, there is like kind of a matrix going on between the type of proxy provider that you're using, be it data center, proxy API, residential, mobile, or underlying on the new form of unlockers designed to get around anti-bots, and the type of requests you're sending. Is it going to be standard HTTP requests? HTTP requests like some form of session or cookie handling using a stripped down headless browser, or a full on headless browser and just rendering the whole thing. And as we move away from data center and straight HTTP requests, our costs are increasing. So the most expensive versions of this is using an unlockers with full headless browsing. So it's basically, it really comes down to your end use case and like the website you're scraping and like the type of page you're scraping and what exactly you are doing on the page. And so next we're just going to go through some examples to help you pick out what are actually general rules of thumb, to how to actually pick what is the best setup. So we say for like simple websites, your first option should just be using data center proxies and optimized fingerprints. Um, Pretty much most proxy APIs, this is what they're doing behind the scenes. They just have big pools of data center proxy. They've optimized their fingerprints, and they're able to get 90 plus success rates for most simple websites. So you can do this in house by yourself. If you don't have the technical capabilities or it's just too much hassle for you, we advise just switching to the proxy APIs themselves. Most websites will be able to scrape at the one API credit level or however way they're charging it, but you have basically very little hassle. They do all the hard work and optimization, and you get pretty good prices. And this should work on 80 to 90% of websites. Next is if you're scraping internal API endpoints or web pages with small payloads. Typically what we recommend to people, and this is what we do as well in-house, is you should be using residential or mobile proxies with good fingerprints that charge per gigabyte. Because the payloads are so small, it costs very little to actually scrape at scale when you're using residentials per gigabyte if the payload is very small. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than using a proxy API that is charging per successful request. If it is a protected endpoint with that has some form of anti-bot on it, one of the big ones, what I'd say the next best option is use an unlocker that charges per gigabyte. And there is a couple of them out there that do that. So leave them handle the anti-bot bypassing, etc. But they're only charging you per gigabyte. And the cost per gigabyte is still going to be a fraction of all you pay if you're paying per successful request. So that's like a hack that you can use to actually scrape some of these hard API endpoints at scale, um, while keeping your costs pretty low. And if neither of them working, then the recommendation is just like uh, go to a proxy API. And if you're scraping any type of volume, it doesn't work out of the box, you just email their support and they let them figure it out. Um, and the good ones will figure it out for you. And so then like you don't have to deal with all like the optimizing the headers, etc. for these API endpoints, and you just get pretty good performance. If the website is anti-bot protected, the easiest option, what we'd recommend, and this is what we do as well internally, is we use the proxy APIs and you just test multiple proxy APIs and find out which guys give you the best performance at the lowest cost. There are big variations in the price and performance of the different websites when they're using anti-bots. So just don't take the first one that works and assume that's the best. Test 4, 5, 10 of them, however many that you want, and just like test them and figure out which one is going to give you the best price. There's a lot of shadow pricing going on with proxy providers, especially the proxy APIs, where they might actually have hidden prices for particular websites. So they might charge 10 API credits for one website versus one for another website, and it isn't very seeable in their documentation. So that's why we say you have to test multiple proxy APIs and just like find the one that has the best price performance for your use case. If cost optimization is crucial for your use case, and this is only really worthwhile if you're scripting really large volumes. So, like, I don't know, I would say over 50 million pages per month, 100 million pages per month. Um, is you use a stripped down headless browser with cookie harvesting and just get good proxies and figure out a way to bypass it. That is what proxy APIs and the different unlockers are doing behind the scenes. So you can replicate that as well if you want. But typically, the amount of engineering time you're going to have to go into figure this out in the first place, then also deal with the inevitable situation where the website or antibot changes to protection and your whole data feed goes down. If you're scripting at lower volumes, let someone else figure this out for you. It's not worth the hassle. Focus on your end use case and like what you're going to do with the data, and then getting your like profit and margins from that instead of trying to optimize the whole proxies to save a couple $100 maybe, or even less. Let someone else figure it out for you. It's way worth the time and engineering time. Just outsource it. And lastly, if you are doing something that requires a headless browser, our recommendation and what we do as well in house is if there's light page interaction. So that is maybe just like you have to scroll a page to for infinite scroll, or that you might have to click on one button, etc., or wait a couple of seconds for the page to fully render. Most of the time, if for like a very simple website, you can use a headless browser with data center, residential, or mobile proxies. Ideally using data center. Um, and if the website is a bit more difficult, then I would recommend using a proxy API who has built-in functionality that allows you to control the browser. Because that let them deal with the hassle of this. They'll have optimized their system a lot more, and they work pretty well for simple page interaction, simple waits for like 3 seconds. The different proxy APIs work pretty well. If you need to do heavy page interaction, um, then basically all the proxy APIs aren't suited for this. Because underlying because basically they cut out after a couple of seconds, so you really need to use your own headless browser in these situations, and using a headless browser with data center, residential, or mobile proxy, whatever you need to get your end use case. Typically, if you're using a headless browser, like your own headless browsers, be it Puppeteer, Selenium, or Playwright, um, they don't work very well setting the proxy provider as a proxy API, because proxy APIs typically charge per successful page rendered. And if you're using a headless browser, you're charging for all the network requests. So one to load one page could consume 20, 30, 50 different network requests, and so it's basically 20 times your cost. So if you need to use a headless browser, be it your own headless browser, 99% of the time, it's going to be a lot cheaper and better for you to actually use pay per gigabyte or just like per IP proxies, be it data center, residential, whatever works best for you. And then lastly, just like the future outlook, what's happening in the market. So there's escalating usage of antibots going on. So scraping is getting more and more expensive, and it will get more expensive. It's a trend that is what is happening in the market. Um, we're going to see more domain level pricing. So more and more proxy providers are charging different rates depending on the domain you're scraping. And that in some ways at the moment, it's making more opaque and harder to actually see how much a proxy provider is going to cost you until you start testing them. So you can't just look at someone's pricing page and say it's going to be this. You can't compare them based on pricing page. You have to actually have to test them and see how much they're going to charge you for the end, for your use case. So this is making it harder to benchmark proxy providers and find the best one for your use case. So like that's a challenge, and it's getting worse over time. And yeah, we're probably going to see more technical scraping problems, like those shadow costs that I mentioned before. Um, is more and more websites are going to start implementing. We're probably going to see more things, more stuff move behind logins, more and response size is being truncated, more things move to pop-ups, more different basically ways that aren't necessarily anti-bot measures that prevent you rendering the page or getting access to the page, but reduce the amount of data you get. So you have to do multiple requests to get the same amount of data, and that, depending on the situation, could double, triple, or 10x your costs. Um, so yeah, thank you very much for listening. We're going to open for questions, I think. But if you want to contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Ian Kerins, or on Twitter. Um, we also have a newsletter, the Web Scraping Insider, where we go into detail, like from basically behind the scenes looks at what's happening in the scraping market from large scale web scraping perspective and different proxy providers, like what we're seeing in the market. And we give insights pretty much every month on what is happening. So if you're interested, sign up to that newsletter. Thank you very much, guys. I think I'll hand it back over to you, and okay, we can move on to the next stage if that makes sense to you.
Yep. Thanks, Jan. That was awesome. So much to unpack there. So, Brano is asking, like, with so many new providers showing up lately, do you think the market eventually going to consolidate around just few major vendors?
It's it it's the natural thing you see in the market. What's happening? We see it like there has been some acquisitions in the last 6 months. Some people are getting bought out. Um, in some ways, this market is different because it's not, as we said, it's not just one best proxy provider. It is what is the best proxy provider for your end use case. And there's always going to be big variations between different websites. So if one person can consume, who can actually give high performance across them, it might work. It's hard to know. My guess is probably going to probably some level of consolidation, but it's not going to go down to like there's only 5 providers. There's still going to be 20, 30 good providers out there. That'll be my feeling, and so it's still going to be level of complexity in trying to find the best one. The barriers to setting up a proxy company have gone down massively over the last year or two. There's a lot of reselling going on, and there's a lot of just people just like marketing shells on top of proxy solutions. Hopefully
Awesome.
that answers the question.
Yeah. We have another one from the Simon. So, what tools can we use to manage our proxy cost, given how hard it is to find a good one that works and is cost efficient enough?
Um, So at the moment, I can say there are some like ScrapeOpsy as an open source tool out there. I haven't used it personally myself properly, but it's on GitHub, and there's some form of like open source proxy aggregator. But you still need to do all the testing yourself. Um, Obviously we have ScrapeOps where we do that for you. You send us the request, and we find the best performance at the lowest cost for you. Um, what we are doing internally, what we're building, what we're going to be launching next month or two is Skyscanner for proxies. So we're going to start releasing the underlying data that we have, uh, and what is the best proxy provider for your use case. So then you say, I'm scraping X website, and you can see historical performance with the underlying pricing for that website, and you can pick the best one. And then also we'll probably release some tools um, to say if you have a bucket of 5 websites, what would be the best combination of proxy providers? So that would be like open source, like okay, free to access tooling that we'll be giving out. We're going to be doing stuff like that. Um, but at the moment, there isn't really any tool that we found. There's a couple of ones doing some form of like reviews and stuff like, but no one's really doing it at the scale and the data integrity that we feel that you can rely on. It does it takes this I don't know 50 to 60 different proxy providers out there that's worth monitoring. Each of them have most people now have data center, residential, mobile, and some form of API. So there's like 4 products for each. So actually, to build something to test and benchmark them all, you have to integrate nearly with 200 different products, and then you also need to put volume through every single product. So to actually benchmarking these things properly is going to cost you a couple. $1,000 a month actually do this. So it isn't a cheap thing to actually build an app provide publicly. We have the data internally, so what we're working on is to start releasing it.
Yeah. I think this even answers the next question from Noor. So he's asking about, like you said, most bans come from the fingerprints and not from the proxies. So does ScrapeOps help with that automatically, like dashboard or something to monitor the performance?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're integrated into all the different proxy providers. So like there's about 10, 15 different proxy APIs, and there's like, okay, there's another 20 or 30 different like pure proxy styles. And basically, our system is designed that you send us the request, and our system optimizes and finds the best proxy provider for your use case. So you don't see what the fingerprints we're using. We work with Zeiss, we work with all the different proxy providers, and we just test them all. So we're constantly benchmarking, storing the data, and then the system is optimizing. And if someone goes down, the system automatically falls back and uses someone else, and is optimizing every day. So it's basically a black box system. Um, but yeah, that's what we're doing underneath the thing. But you can do all this yourself. You can like there's nothing proprietary. You can do this internally. What basically we're doing is just because we've been around for years, we've all the tooling, the whole system is set up, so we kind of do it for you.